Welcome everyone, this is Halak. In this Java tutorial session, I'll be discussing the for loop. Okay, the for loop happens to be one of my favorite loops out of all the loops because it's you know how to use it. It's very flexible. Okay, so before I actually go into the for loop, I'm going to have to tell you the reason why I prefer the for loop over the while loop. All right. So let's just say I have a counter there I. Okay. So declare that. Now if I go while I is less than 10. All right. Let's just say that. Okay. And by the way, what I should mention this is that you should never actually use like hard-coded numbers. These are called magic numbers. What we actually want to do is, in circumstances like this, is actually create a constant for it. Okay, so maybe I'll just go and talk about constants. So it's kind of a a bit of digression, but I think this is important. So I'm gonna business max is equal to 10. Okay, so you notice I use the keyword final here. Okay, so final means that it's constant. You can't change this. Right? So you want to reassign max to something else, you get an error. And you also notice that I've capitalized these. Right, the convention in Java is that constants are capitalized. Okay, so for example, if I wanted something like this, maximum, right, value. Okay, now I would have to use the underscore because if I actually put them together, it's really hard to read. Okay? So I could do something like that. Right? So the reason you do this is that if you have 10 in multiple places, all you have to do is change the value up here. So if I have maximum value in like 10 different places and I want to change this, all I have to do is actually change it in one location. Right? And so let's just use that. So maximum value. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'll just increment that, right? I think in the in an earlier tutorial, I actually just printed out the counter. Okay. So I, right? I, and then I'm going to increment I. Okay. Right. So it starts at 0, and then it's going to go from 0 to 9. I'm just going to put in a blank line. Okay. So let's just run that. Let's make sure. So we see what we're printing out. All right. So from 0 to 9. Okay. Now, with a for loop, okay. So with a for loop, you notice that with I now, I has scope within, right? It has a variable scope extending from every other constant. So for example, I can be seen in here, right? So if I actually, with a while loop, let's just say this, okay? I'm going to declare. You notice I can actually declare and initialize a variable inside the entire the for loop syntax there. So I can actually do the same thing here. Maximum value. Right, use the shortcut key there. All right. So this is my for loop. This is equivalent to what I have up here. Okay. So I'm just going to actually copy this down. Type. Okay. All right. So if I print this out, you're going to see that it's going to be the same thing. Okay. So from 0 to 9 with my for loop. Okay. But you see how clean it is, right? For example, if I actually want to make this more readable, I would actually have to do something like this. Right. So this took how many lines of code, and this one only pretty much took, without the curly braces, it would just be 2 lines. All right, so what's happening here? All right, the same thing's happening here. So first, for a for loop, what you need to do is that the first time you encounter this statement here, notice I say it's a statement because there's a semicolon here. Okay, with a for loop, the initialization occurs only once at the beginning of the loop. Okay, so the initialization occurs. After the initialization occurs, the condition is evaluated, just like in the while loop. Okay, the condition is evaluated. Okay, and once, if this is true, the body of the loop, you're allowed to gain entrance to the body of this loop, and which we do. Okay, because j is still less than 10. Okay, and it gets printed out. After this gets printed out, the increment occurs. Okay, we increment this. All right. After we increment this, this is the same thing that's happening here with I++, but it's j++ here. But we're just using a different variable to make it clearer. Okay. Now you notice that for the while loop, when this is done, it loops back up and it does the evaluation again. We don't loop back up and say we're going to reinitialize again. We don't do that. We're going to come back up and we're going to evaluate this condition. And this is what's happening with the for loop as well. After this increment, it comes back here and we do the evaluation of this condition here. And if it's true, we again enter the loop. Okay, same thing as the while loop. If this is true, then we enter into this loop. All right, so they're the same, but you notice how clean the for loop is. Okay, now if I did something like this, for example, all right, notice if I did something like this, I can't redeclare I. Okay, all right, it's going to complain. Okay, j cannot be resolved to a variable, duplicate local variable I. See that in this statement there. Okay, so it's a duplicate because we already used up, we declared I up here, right? And I is within scope of this for loop now. Okay. However, if we say that I did this, okay, with j, and then I do it again, I'm going to make another copy. Okay. You notice that there's no error. I'm allowed to do that because the declaration is within the scope of this for loop only for this variable. Okay, so that means that I'm free to use j anywhere else. All right, if I happen to use j, for example, if I, right, you use it up and it gets changed somehow, and later on in the program, you forget that I is within scope, bad things can happen. Okay, so with a for loop, it is very clean. Okay, this is a very clean thing. Okay. All right. So that's the for loop. It's compact. Okay. Now you can also have what you call an infinite loop. Okay. Some students ask me that. So for example, let's just say. This is an example of an infinite loop. So while it's true, second component here. Unreachable code. Yeah, no kidding. All right. So I'm gonna comment this out because it's gonna complain that it's unreachable code. I'm gonna get rid of this because we don't need this anymore. All right. So if this is true, all right, we keep on spinning. Okay. This is actually a shortcut for an infinite loop. Okay, so that's an infinite loop. And you can keep on going and going. All right. For the for loop, you can actually do the same thing. Okay, so if I comment that out, and this is also an infinite loop, but it's the for statement. Okay, so there you go, and that's the difference between the two, and I like the for loop because it's much more compact. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. See you in the next one. Take care.